The sky was not just dark, it was bruised with purple and black clouds that seemed to scream. Rain lashed against our small hut in the riverside village of Obodo, but the sound of the storm was nothing compared to the sound of my sister's voice. I stood by the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Outside, Chinwe was being pulled toward the churning river. There was no one holding her, yet her body twisted as if invisible iron chains were wrapped around her waist. She clawed at the muddy ground, her fingernails breaking, leaving deep grooves in the earth. "Udoka, help me!" she shrieked, but her voice was changing. It sounded like grinding stones and rushing water. As her feet touched the river's edge, she turned her head back one last time. Her eyes were no longer brown. They were swirling pools of cold silver liquid. "It is coming for you next, Udoka," she whispered. Then, with a violent splash, the river swallowed her whole, leaving only bubbles behind. The silence that followed the storm was heavier than the rain itself. I sat on the floor of our empty hut, staring at the door. My mother's voice echoed in the back of my mind, a soft warning from years ago that now felt like a scream. She used to sit us down by the fire and hold our hands tightly. "Listen to me, my daughters," she would say, her eyes grave. "In this world, there is a path made of gold and a path made of sweat. Easy money never comes alone. It is a guest that brings a hungry spirit into your home." Back then, Chinwe would always roll her eyes and laugh, dreaming of silk and beads. But now, looking at Chinwe's empty sleeping mat, the truth felt like a cold blade. The villagers began to gather outside, their torches flickering in the damp air. I heard the old men whispering, "The river has taken another. The debt has been paid." But they were wrong. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. This didn't start at the river tonight. Before the gold and the madness, we were just two sisters who shared everything. Our life in Obodo was hard, but it was filled with love. We spent our days carrying heavy water pots from the stream, and our nights mending torn wrappers by the light of a dim oil lamp. We were poor, yes, but we had peace. However, I watched as a seed of envy began to grow in Chinwe's heart. She would stand by the village square watching the wealthy traders' wives pass by in their vibrant laces and clinking jewelry. "Why must we live like goats in the dust, Udoka?" she would ask, her voice bitter. "Why does the sun shine on them and leave us in the shade?" I tried to remind her of our mother's words, but she would just pull her hand away. One evening, a traveler mentioned a place deep in the forest where a trader lived, a man who could turn pebbles into pearls for something small. Chinwe didn't sleep that night. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors of blood, when Chinwe stood up from her chores. I knew that look in her eyes. It was the look of a hunter who didn't care about the trap. "I am going to the forest, Udoka," she said firmly. My breath caught in my throat. The forest was forbidden for a reason. It was a place where the trees whispered secrets and the shadows had teeth. "Please, Chinwe, remember what Mama said. No money is worth your soul," I cried, grabbing her arm. She shook me off with a strength that frightened me. "I am tired of hunger, little sister. I will be back before the moon is high." I followed her to the edge of the trees, but the forest seemed to reach out and pull her in, the vines closing behind her like a heavy curtain. As I stood there trembling, a voice drifted from the deep shadows, cold and ancient. "What are you willing to give for the world?" Hours passed like years until the bushes finally parted. Chinwe stepped out, but she was not the same girl who had entered. She carried a heavy leather bag that clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold coins. Her dress was no longer tattered cotton. It was smooth, expensive silk that shimmered like moonlight. Even her skin had a strange golden glow, making her look like a queen from a legend. I ran to her, half relieved and half terrified. "Chinwe, you're safe. What happened? What did you give that traitor?" She looked at me, and for a second I saw a flash of pure terror in her eyes before it was replaced by a cold, hard pride. "It was nothing important, Udoka," she said, her voice sounding strangely hollow. "Just a small promise. Look at this gold. We will never be hungry again." That night, as we lay in bed, I heard something scratching at the walls of our hut, a wet, sloppy sound, and a voice that whispered her name over and over. The days that followed, our lives changed completely. Chinwe bought the finest lace in the market and hired laborers to build us a new house with a roof that didn't leak. People who used to ignore us now bowed when she walked past. Her carriage was new, her head held high, but the joy didn't reach her heart. She became cold, looking at our old friends as if they were dirt beneath her feet. "Don't touch that with your dusty hands," she snapped at a neighbor who tried to admire her fabric. I watched her closely, noticing things that others missed. One afternoon, while she stood near the wash basin, I looked down at her feet. The sun was bright, yet Chinwe had no shadow on the ground. When she stood before the polished bronze mirror she had bought, her reflection was blurry and gray like a ghost fading into a mist. She was becoming a stranger in her own skin, a beautiful shell with nothing inside. The rot started small, but it was everywhere. One morning, I went to the kitchen to prepare our breakfast. The yams we had bought just the day before were covered in thick black mold that smelled of the grave. The dried fish had turned into piles of gray ash. I opened the water pot, but the water was thick and dark, smelling like stagnant river mud. "Chinwe, look at this," I called out. She walked in, draped in gold, and looked at the rot with total indifference. "Throw it away and buy more," she said. "We have the money." But it wasn't just the food. The flowers in our garden withered as she walked past. The very air in our house felt heavy and damp. Late that night, I woke up to find her bed empty. I crept toward the back door and saw her standing in the yard. She was talking to the darkness, nodding her head as if listening to a teacher. There was no one there, but the grass around her feet was turning black. Chinwe began to disappear into the forest more frequently. Each time she returned, she brought more treasures, jewels that burned with an inner light, and fabrics that felt like woven water. But the cost was visible on her body. She was growing thinner, her collarbones sticking out like sharp rocks. Her skin, once glowing, was now pale and translucent. One evening, while she was sleeping, her sleeve slid up. I gasped and covered my mouth from keeping from screaming. Creeping up her arm were dark, vine-like marks. They weren't painted on. They were under her skin, pulsing like veins. They looked like the roots of an old tree seeking water. "Chinwe, please," I whispered, shaking her awake. "Stop going to that place. Look at what it's doing to you." She opened her eyes, and for a moment they were completely black. "I cannot stop, Udoka," she groaned, her voice sounding like dry leaves. "The more I have, the more I need. The trader says I'm almost finished with the counting." The pride in Chinwe's heart became a poison that touched everyone in Obodo. She began to use her wealth to humiliate the very people who had once helped us when we had nothing. She mocked the village elders and laughed at the widows. "You are poor because you are weak," she told them at the village square. I felt so much shame that I could hardly walk through the market. When I tried to talk to her, she turned on me with a sneer. "You are just jealous, Udoka. You want to be the one with the gold." As she spoke, the vine marks on her neck throbbed. An old woman named Ma Azine grabbed my hand as I walked home. Her grip was like iron. "Your sister is being counted, child," she whispered, her milky eyes full of pity. I trembled, knowing exactly what she meant. I went back to Ma Azine the next day, desperate for answers. Her hut smelled of herbs and ancient smoke. "Tell me about the forest trader," I begged. She sighed and tossed some shells on a mat. "He is not a man, Udoka. He is a spirit of balance. Long ago, humans took too much from the earth without giving back, so the trader was born. He feeds on greed. He gives you exactly what you want, but he takes what you need to be human." She leaned closer, her voice a ghost of a sound. "He looks for those who are never satisfied. He lets them count their gold until they forget the weight of their own souls. Once you stop seeing yourself in the mirror, it means the balance is gone. And when the balance is gone, the river, the doorway to his world, opens. Your sister has almost reached the end of her tally. When the counting ends, the river comes for the heart." The whispers became so loud they filled our house like a swarm of bees. I could hear them in the wind, in the cooking fire, and even in my own dreams. "Chinwe, Chinwe, the time is near." They weren't human voices. They sounded like the bubbling of a deep swamp. Chinwe began to sleepwalk every night. I would wake up to find her standing by the door, her hand on the latch, her eyes open but unseeing. She would walk toward the river path, and I would have to pull her back with all my strength. One night, she snapped out of her trance and began to scream, a sound so raw it tore at my soul. "I didn't agree to this. He said it was just a small payment. He didn't say he would take the light." She collapsed into my arms, weeping. For a moment, she was my sister again, small and terrified. But the vine marks on her skin glowed a sickly green, and I knew the spirit was not done with her. On the final day, a heavy, unnatural fog rolled into our village. It was so thick you couldn't see your own hand. A large, ornate wooden box appeared on our doorstep, tied with a ribbon made of human hair. Chinwe opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a crown made of pure, dark gold. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, yet it made my stomach turn. As she touched it, a voice boomed through the house, though there was no one there. "The final gift is accepted. The debt is due." Chinwe tried to throw the crown away, but it stuck to her fingers like it was part of her flesh. "No, I don't want it anymore," she cried. But the sky turned black as pitch, and a violent wind began to rip the thatch from our roof. The river began to rise, the water turning an angry, foaming red. The counting was over. This was the moment the storm broke, the moment I saw my sister dragged away. The invisible force was relentless. I tried to hold on to her, but the mud was slick and the wind was too strong. I watched as Chinwe vanished into the red water, her scream cut short by a final choking splash. I stood on the bank, cold and broken, as the river slowly began to recede. The silence that followed was terrifying. I looked down at my own reflection in a puddle, expecting to see my tear-stained face. Instead, I saw nothing. My heart stopped. I reached out to touch a nearby tree, and I heard a soft, familiar bubbling sound. "Udoka, Udoka, it is your turn to count." I looked down at my wrist and saw a single, thin green line beginning to crawl under my skin. The curse had not died with my sister, it had simply moved to the next branch of the tree. I ran back to Ma Ezine's hut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I showed her the mark on my arm. She didn't look surprised. "The spirit of greed is like a fire, Udoka. It doesn't stop until it has burned the whole forest. Because you were her blood and you shared in her wealth, the debt has transferred to you." I fell to my knees sobbing. "But I never wanted the gold. I tried to stop her." Ma Ezine touched my head gently. "It does not matter. The balance must be restored. The debt is not finished because your sister gave her shadow, but she did not give her heart. The spirit wants a heart that is full, and hers was already empty from pride." She looked me in the eye. You have two choices. You can hide and wait for the river to take you, or you can go to the forest and face the traitor. But know this, the spirit does not trade twice, unless the cost is far greater than gold." "What did Shinwei really give him first?" I asked, my voice trembling. Ma Izine pointed to the floor where my shadow should have been. "The first payment is always your shadow, your spiritual balance. It is the part of you that keeps you connected to the earth. Without it, you are just a ghost waiting to happen." Chinwei thought it was nothing important because she couldn't see its value, but once she gave it away, she had no weight to resist the spirit's pull. That is why the river could take her so easily. She was already half gone. I realized then that my sister had been a prisoner long before the storm. The gold was just the bars of her cage. If I wanted to save myself and somehow bring her back, I had to find a way to offer the spirits something more valuable than a shadow. I had to offer a truth that greed could not touch. The weight of the mark on my arm grew heavier with every hour. I could feel it pulsing, a tiny heartbeat of darkness. I knew I couldn't stay in the village. If I stayed, the river would eventually come back, and who knew who else it would take. I packed a small bag with only the essentials, no gold, no jewels, only a small carving our mother had made for us. I looked at the dark wall of the forbidden forest. It looked like a giant beast waiting to swallow me. "I am coming for her," I whispered to the wind. The villagers watched me leave with fearful eyes, no one daring to walk beside me. I reached the edge where the light of the sun seemed to die. I took a deep breath and stepped into the trees. The air immediately turned cold, and the sound of the village disappeared, replaced by the creaking of ancient wood and the laughter of hidden birds. The forbidden forest was alive. The trees didn't stand still. They seemed to lean toward me, their branches like long, bony fingers. The paths shifted under my feet, turning me in circles until I was completely lost. Every leaf that brushed against my skin felt like a cold tongue. "Why are you here, little heart? Do you want gold? Do you want silk?" I ignored them and kept walking, guided by the throbbing of the mark on my arm. I reached a clearing where the ground was covered in white bones, not of animals but of things that looked like broken statues. In the center sat a figure on a throne of twisted roots. He was tall and thin, wrapped in robes made of living shadows. His face was a mask of silver that changed shape every second, showing 1,000 different expressions of greed. This was the forest trader. He didn't breathe, he hummed. "The sister comes to settle the account," the trader said, his voice sounding like 1,000 coins hitting the floor. He leaned forward and the silver mask settled into a cruel smile. "Your sister was a fine counter, Udoka. She loved the gold so much she forgot to breathe. Why have you come? Do you want to take her place in the palace of lace? I can give you wealth that would make kings weep. I can make you the most beautiful woman in the world." He waved a hand, and suddenly the clearing was filled with chests of diamonds and piles of shimmering fabric. "Take it all," he urged. "It costs nothing but a small promise." I looked at the treasure, and for a split second I felt the tug of desire. But then I remembered Chinwei's silver eyes and her scream. "I didn't want your gold," I said, my voice steady. "I want my sister back." The trader threw his head back and laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "The spirit does not trade twice, Udoka. The river has claimed her. She is part of the balance now." I stepped forward, holding out my hands. "I will offer you anything else. I will work for you for 100 years. I will give you my labor, my strength, my time." The trader stopped laughing and leaned in close, his silver mask reflecting my terrified face. "I have no use for labor. I have the wind to carry my messages and the roots to build my home. I do not want what you can do. I only take what humans refuse to give." I felt a cold sweat break on my brow. "What is it you want?" I whispered. I feed on selfish desire, the spirit hissed, his shadow robes fluttering. Every gold coin I gave your sister was seasoned with her envy. Every jewel was polished by her pride. That is my food. Without greed, I would starve. I looked at him and finally understood. The trader wasn't a businessman. He was a parasite. He provided the means for people to destroy themselves, and he grew fat on their ruin. He waited for the moment when a person would choose their own comfort over the life of another. That was the something small he collected. I looked at the mark on my arm, which was now glowing brightly. He was waiting for me to ask for my own safety. He wanted me to trade my sister's soul for my own life. That was the trade he was truly offering. If I accepted his protection, the debt would be paid, and I would become just like Chinwe. Choose, Udoka, the trader whispered, waving his hand again. The forest around me vanished, and I saw a vision of my own future. I saw myself living in a beautiful mansion, surrounded by children and a loving husband. I was happy, healthy, and respected. This can be yours, the spirit said. All you have to do is walk away and forget the girl in the river. Let the debt be hers alone. Why should you suffer for her greed? The vision was so warm and inviting, I could almost taste the sweet fruits and feel the soft bed. My heart ached for that life. But then I saw a flicker of movement in the corner of the vision, a shadow with no body, weeping in the dark. It was Chinwe. I realized that my happy future would be built on her eternal suffering. I closed my eyes and pulled myself away from the beautiful dream. No, I said, I choose her. The vision shattered into 1,000 pieces. The trader's mask twisted into a snarl of rage. You would throw away a life of joy for a girl who mocked you? He roared. Suddenly, the ground opened up, and a pool of red river water appeared in the clearing. From the depths, a figure rose. It was Chinwe, but she was half transformed. Her legs were fused into a tail of scales, and her skin was covered in the same vine marks that were on my arm. She looked trapped, like a fly in a web. "Udoka, go back!" she cried, her voice echoing as if from underwater. "Don't do this. He will take everything you are. I am already lost. Don't let him take you too." Seeing her like that broke my heart. She wasn't the proud, cold queen anymore. She was just my sister, drowning in her own mistakes. I stepped toward the water, ignoring the trader's hiss. "I offer you the only thing you cannot take by force," I said to the trader, standing at the edge of the red pool. "I offer you a sacrifice made in love, with no hope of reward." I reached out and took Chinwe's cold, scaly hand. The trader shrieked, the sound tearing through the trees. My act of selflessness was like poison to him. He lived on greed. He could not digest a heart that gave itself away for nothing. The vine marks on my arm began to burn with a white light, spreading through my body. The red water began to boil and turn clear. The silver mask on the trader's face cracked and fell to the ground. "This is not balance," he screamed, but it was. The balance of greed was broken by the weight of love. With a final explosion of light, the forest went silent. When I opened my eyes, the trader was gone, and the forbidden forest looked like an ordinary wood. The curse was broken, but as Ma Edzine had warned, the cost was still high. Chinwe lay on the grass beside me, breathing but changed. She was no longer half fish, but she was no longer the beauty of the village either. Her hair had turned gray, and her skin was lined with the scars of the vine marks. The gold crown and the silk dresses had vanished, replaced by the tattered cotton wrapper she had worn the day she first went into the forest. We walked back to Obodo slowly. The villagers gathered to watch us, but there were no bows this time. They saw a broken girl who had fallen from her high tower of pride. Chinwe kept her head down, her eyes full of a quiet, heavy sorrow. She had her life back, but she had to live with the memory of what she had become. She had to face the people she had mocked, with nothing in her hands but the dust of her own choices. Chinwe spent the rest of her days in a small hut at the edge of the village. She never sought wealth again. Instead, she spent her time helping the widows and teaching the children, her hands always busy with honest work. She was humble and kind, but she never smiled quite like she used to. I stayed by her side, respected by the village for my courage, but I never forgot the feeling of the river water on my skin. We lived simply, just as our mother had taught us. Sometimes, when the wind blows from the forest, I still hear a faint clinking sound, like gold coins falling on stone. But I don't look back. I know now that peace is a treasure no trader can provide. Every evening, I look at my shadow on the ground and give thanks for its weight. Because, as our mother always said, easy money always comes with a shadow, and one day it will ask you to stand in the dark.